Real-Time 1960s presents Evening Report, a complete roundup of today's news with Joe Rubenstein.
Good evening. In Washington, President Johnson makes a major announcement. In Dallas, Governor Connally speaks out. Jack Ruby is indicted. Cape Canaveral has a new name. And a gifted young quarterback wins the Heisman Trophy. Those are the headlines. The details after this message.
Now, 4 great ways to lose weight with thrifty new Plan. The Dairy Delightful Liquid Dietary. Plan is smooth like a milkshake, satisfies hunger, provides energy and nourishment while you lose weight. Plan's rich chocolate or creamy vanilla adds variety, helps you stick to your Plan and a meal a day diet. Plan offers 3 other diet programs: the All Plan Diet, Plan Stay As You Are, and Plan Youth Fitness Diet for teenagers. Full details are in every thrifty Plan 4-pack. Costs less than $1. So start on your Plan diet today.
In Washington tonight, President Johnson announced the creation of a special commission to investigate the assassination of President Kennedy and the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald. The president's statement said that Chief Justice Earl Warren would serve as chairman of the 7-member fact-finding commission. The other appointees were Senator Richard Russell, Democrat of Georgia, Senator John Sherman Cooper, Republican of Kentucky, Congressman Hale Boggs, Democrat of Louisiana, Congressman Gerald Ford, Republican of Michigan, Alan Dulles, former director of the CIA, and John McCloy, former advisor to President Kennedy. President Johnson instructed all federal agencies and departments to lend services and cooperation to the commission, which will have all necessary powers, including the power of subpoena. Although Dallas police and the FBI are convinced beyond doubt that Oswald, a 24-year-old self-proclaimed Marxist, fired the shots that killed President Kennedy, many critical questions remain. Among them are these. Number 1. Did Oswald have an accomplice? 2. Was the assassination part of a conspiracy? 3. Did Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald, have any prior association with his victim? 4. How did Ruby get into Dallas Police Headquarters, where he killed Oswald? 5. What were the motives for the killing of the president and Oswald? 6. Why was Oswald, a known Castro supporter and former defector to the Soviet Union, not kept under surveillance during the president's visit to Dallas? And 7. Were the Secret Service and Dallas police lax in protecting both Mr. Kennedy and his accused assassin? In creating a commission composed of Republicans and Democrats, Southerners and Northerners, elected officials and private individuals, and members of the legislative and judicial branches, President Johnson seeks to ensure that the commission's findings will be above reproach and acceptable to all Americans. Tonight, White House officials said there would be no time limit on the Warren Commission's investigation. On Wednesday, President Johnson, the first Southerner to become chief executive since Woodrow Wilson, called for speedy passage of President Kennedy's civil rights program. Mr. Johnson, appearing before a joint session of Congress, made this the focal point of a speech that was well received by members of both parties. He opened his remarks with a tribute to President Kennedy.
All I have, I would have given gladly not to be standing here today. The greatest leader of our time has been struck down by the foulest deed of our time. Today, John Fitzgerald Kennedy lives on in the immortal words and works that he left behind.
Later in the speech, Mr. Johnson called for the translation of his predecessor's ideas and ideals into effective action. He left no doubt that he wanted Congress to move ahead on virtually every point of the Kennedy program now, rather than in January.
This is our challenge, not to hesitate, not to pause, not to turn about and linger over this evil moment, but to continue on our course so that we may fulfill the destiny that history has set for us. No memorial oration or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long. We have talked long enough in this country about equal rights. We have talked for 100 years or more. It is time now to write the next chapter and to write it in the books of law.
Elsewhere, the president said the U.S. would keep its international commitments.
Under John Kennedy's leadership, this nation has demonstrated that it has the courage to seek peace, and it has the fortitude to risk war. We have proved that we are a good and reliable friend to those who seek peace and freedom. We have shown that we can also be a formidable foe to those who reject the path of peace and those who seek to impose upon us or our ally the yoke of tyranny. This nation will keep its commitments from South Vietnam to West Berlin.
Seated in the House chamber was President Kennedy's brother and closest advisor, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, who sat in the front row with other members of the cabinet. Mr. Kennedy, who appeared to have lost weight since his brother's death, frequently joined in the applause for President Johnson. But, pale with fatigue and grief, the Attorney General stared straight ahead as he did so, his facial expression bearing no trace of emotion. In Dallas Wednesday, Texas Governor John Connally made his first public remarks about the assassination of President Kennedy. The governor, who was hit by the same volley of shots that killed the president, was interviewed in his bed at Parkland Hospital by Martin Agronsky of NBC News. In the interview, Governor Connally told of the huge positive crowds that had greeted President Kennedy in Dallas last Friday.
We'd had a great morning in Fort Worth, a magnificent breakfast. We made the trip to Dallas, with huge throngs along the way. We got into downtown Dallas with tremendous crowds, real warmth, real understanding, real appreciation. And Nellie and I saw it so vividly because we were riding in the car with them. We did not attempt to acknowledge the obvious ovation that they were getting because we knew it was for the Kennedys. Magnificent.
He then described the actual shooting.
We heard a shot. I turned to my left to look in the back seat. The president had slumped. He had said nothing. Almost simultaneously, as I turned, I was hit. I knew I'd been hit badly. I knew the president had been hit, and I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. And then there was a third shot, and the president was hit again. I had still regained consciousness, but the president had slumped in Miss Kennedy's lap, and when he was hit the second time, she said, oh my God, they've killed my husband. I said, Jack.
The governor was asked when he was first told that President Kennedy was dead.
They told me Saturday, after I was conscious enough really to understand. It was no news to me, though, because I was almost sure that he would be after the two shots that I felt he'd taken.
Finally, Mr. Connally, a longtime friend and ally of President Johnson, was asked for his assessment of the new chief executive.
A person of many complexities, really. He will not be the most well-read person you will ever know. But he will have a human instinct that I think will almost surpass any other person that you'll ever encounter. He is a person of great charm, of great poise. At times he can be almost brusque and rude. Always determined, firm, an indomitable and indefatigable worker. He was born in a rugged country, saw many hard times, I would say poverty-stricken times. He pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. He's been a laborer, and not just to be one to say he'd been one, but because he had to be one. He's been a school teacher. He headed the NYA, Martin, when he was 26 years old. And he was the youngest NYA administrator in the country. I think by any standards, is one of the finest jobs in the United States. There he worked again with young people, saw the need for education. He's walked among the great, yet I don't think it has ever changed him in the least. I think he still has the rough hewn, the rough exterior of the hill country from which he came and which he loves. I think he's in many ways as readable as an open book. Yet again, a very complex person.
I'll have more news for you after this message.
Excuse me, madam, but have you ever tried Soda Burst?
Oh, yes, I was the first on my block.
Then you know that Soda Burst is the real ice cream soda that makes itself at home?
I just loved it.
And you know there's a big scoop of ice cream and lots of real soda fountain fizz?
It was delicious.
Soda Burst's a real hit at parties and a favorite for snacks, too.
My grandson just loved it. He couldn't get enough.
And it comes in your 4 favorite flavors, all chocolate, black and white, strawberry, and pineapple.
Oh, yes, I remember. It was so hard to decide.
Soda Burst, now at new lower prices. Soda Burst by Birdseye.
Here again, Joe Rubenstein.
On Tuesday, 52-year-old Jack Ruby was indicted by a Dallas County grand jury in the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald on November 24th. He is expected to go on trial early next year. The charge carries a maximum penalty of death in the electric chair, and the prosecution has said it will ask for the death penalty. Tom Howard, Ruby's principal lawyer, said earlier this week he would seek a verdict of not guilty on the grounds that Ruby was insane when he shot Oswald.
He was certainly in a state of emotional collapse at the time of the shooting and probably out of his mind. I've known him about 10 years, and he's a very likable fellow. He's well-liked in Dallas and is a very law-abiding citizen, and I'm satisfied that it wouldn't have made any difference whether the president was Republican or Democrat. He would have been upset about it in the same way.
This afternoon, the attorney was asked to confirm reports that he would seek a change of venue for Ruby's trial.
In view of some of the statements that the district attorney has made in the last few days, he seems to be trying to stir up prejudice against the defendant, making the statement that the defendant had lived neighbors with Oswald. Of course, there's no truth in that at all. He's created an unfair atmosphere, and we might very well have to ask for a change of venue. Everyone is very emotional about this thing. They're very disturbed about the president being assassinated in our city, and they're very disturbed about Oswald, the communist, having been assassinated here. So it very well might be that we'll have to ask for a change of venue.
This afternoon, Columbia Pictures canceled the December 12th world premiere of its film Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Columbia said today that Stanley Kubrick, producer-director of the film, had decided that it would be inappropriate to release a political black comedy so soon after President Kennedy's assassination. The film, which Mr. Kubrick calls a nightmare comedy, in which a psychotic U.S. Air Force general sends B-52s to bomb the Soviet Union, will be released sometime next year. In related news, all prints of the film Take Her, She's Mine were recalled by 20th Century Fox last weekend so that all references to President Kennedy could be removed. The comedy, which stars James Stewart and Sandra Dee, contains 2 scenes in which a college student speaks in a voice resembling that of the late president. Elsewhere, a character supposedly speaks to Mrs. Kennedy over the telephone. A Fox spokesman said all these scenes would be cut. In another move to avoid offense, a scene in next week's episode of NBC's The Patty Duke Show, which shows Miss Duke getting a medal from a man in a rocking chair, has been cut. President Kennedy famously used a rocking chair to relieve back pain from a lingering war injury. And finally, the title of an upcoming episode of the dramatic series The Defenders was to be The Gentle Assassin, but CBS said the title would be changed to Climate of Evil. The episode will air on December 7th, with no other changes. Last night, President Johnson renamed Cape Canaveral in honor of his slain predecessor. The president announced the move in a televised Thanksgiving Day address to the nation. It was President Johnson's first address delivered directly to the American people since becoming president.
All of us have lived through 7 days that none of us will ever forget. We are not given the divine wisdom to answer why this has been, but we are given the human duty of determining what is to be. A great leader is dead. A great nation must move on. Yesterday is not ours to recover, but tomorrow is ours to win or to lose. I am resolved that we shall win the tomorrows before us. So I ask you to join me in that resolve, determined that from this midnight of tragedy, we shall move toward a new American greatness.
At the conclusion of his remarks, Mr. Johnson announced the name change.
We remember in our hearts this brave young man who lies in honored eternal rest across the Potomac. We remember his wonderful and courageous widow that we all love. We remember Caroline and John and all the great family who gave the nation this son and brother. And to honor his memory and the future of the works that he started, I have today determined that Station Number 1 of the Atlantic Missile Range and the NASA Launch Operations Center in Florida shall hereafter be known as the John F. Kennedy Space Center. I have also acted today with the understanding and the support of my friend, the Governor of Florida, Farish Brown, to change the name of Cape Canaveral. It shall be known hereafter as Cape Kennedy.
One of President Kennedy's primary goals had been to make the U.S. preeminent in space. One of his final trips took him to the Florida Space Center that now bears his name. On Monday, it was learned that the first 2 letters Lyndon B. Johnson signed as president were to the 2 children of John F. Kennedy. Mr. Johnson wrote the letters to Caroline Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, Jr. last Friday, just a few hours after he'd been sworn in to succeed their father. Mr. Johnson's letter to the late president's son reads, quote, "Dear John, it will be many years before you understand fully what a great man your father was. His loss is a deep personal tragedy for all of us, but I wanted you particularly to know that I share your grief. You can always be proud of him," unquote. It is signed affectionately, as is the next letter, quote, "Dearest Caroline, your father's death has been a great tragedy for the nation as well as for you at this time. He was a wise and devoted man. You can always be proud of what he did for his country," unquote. Caroline returned to school on Tuesday on the 3rd floor of the White House. Mrs. Kennedy set up the school so her children would be able to live normal lives with other children around them. Caroline, who turned 6 years old on Wednesday, is in the 1st grade. Her classmates are the children of many of the Kennedy family's personal friends, of top administration officials, and White House staff members. Mrs. Kennedy indicated this week to President and Mrs. Johnson that she would like the school to be carried on until June, so the children would have a full, unbroken school term. The Johnsons told her they would be delighted. President Johnson visited the school today. Sports, right after this.
Pardon me, but isn't that a tuberous begonia?
No, ma'am, it's a Roy Tan, a fine American cigar.
Oh, is that so?
Enjoy Roy Tan, a fine American cigar made of fine American tobaccos.
Roger Staubach of Navy has been named the Heisman Trophy winner for 1963. His artistry as a passer, his power as a runner, and his leadership skills on and off the field are considered the primary reasons for the Naval Academy's current 8-1 record. Staubach's personal statistics are outstanding. For the second straight year, he leads the nation's college passers with a completion percentage of 67.3. By air and by land, Staubach has accounted for 92 of the 293 points Navy has scored so far this season. Today, Navy coach Wayne Hardin said, quote, "I'm very pleased with the award, and it's well-deserved. I never personally had any doubt that he would win it. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to play in different sections of the country so that different people could see him play," unquote. As for Staubach, his modest comment on the award was, quote, "Our boys have been getting that second block for me," unquote. Staubach, a 21-year-old native of Cincinnati and the son of a wholesale shoe salesman, has been characterized as a quiet, serious young man, deeply attached to home and church. He attends early Mass every morning, even before games. The trophy presentation ceremony will take place in New York City on December 4th. And that, for this evening, completes our look at the latest news on this Friday, November 29th, 1963. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day tomorrow.
This has been your Evening Report, a roundup of the latest news with Joe Rubenstein.